It was an ordinary morning for most, a typical school day that many students went into not expecting anything out of the ordinary. But for 16-year-old Emma, this day would change everything. She was a quiet girl, a bit reserved, always keeping to herself. She wasn't the one to stand out in a crowd, preferring to blend in with her classmates and not draw attention. But today, that would all change. Emma stepped onto the school bus, like she did every other morning, her backpack hanging off one shoulder, her eyes glued to the floor as she made her way down the aisle. The hum of the engine filled the air, along with the chatter of the other students, who were already gathered in their usual spots. The driver, Mr. Thompson, was sitting behind the wheel, his weathered face set in a neutral expression as he checked the rearview mirror. He was used to the chaos and noise that came with the daily school run. But something about Emma felt different. That morning, as she passed by the driver's seat, she hesitated for a split second, then leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. 3 words. Just 3 words. The words she spoke were so quiet, so unremarkable on their own. Yet in that instant, they would set off a chain of events none of them could have predicted. Call the police. The words hung in the air, almost unnoticed by the other students, but not by Mr. Thompson. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time that morning, a flicker of concern crossed his face. He had known Emma for years, seen her come and go, but there was something different about her this time. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by something far more intense, something he couldn't quite place. Emma took her seat, staring out the window, her hands gripping the edges of her seat, like she was bracing for something. The bus continued on its route, oblivious to the danger that was slowly creeping toward them. But Mr. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had seen enough in his years as a bus driver to know when a child was hiding something, and Emma's behavior wasn't like anything he had ever witnessed before. As the bus neared the school, Mr. Thompson's mind raced. Should he call the police? What could Emma possibly have meant by those 3 words? Should he confront her, or would that make things worse? He wasn't sure what to do, but one thing was certain. He couldn't ignore the urgency in her voice. He pulled over at the school entrance, the usual crowd of students already gathering near the entrance, waiting for their day to begin. Emma, however, remained seated, her face pale and drawn. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stared. Straight ahead, the other students streamed off the bus, oblivious to the growing tension in the air. Mr. Thompson stayed behind for a moment, his fingers hovering over the phone, unsure if he should make the call. Minutes passed, and the bus was nearly empty, when Emma finally stood up, walking off the bus with slow, deliberate steps. But before she could reach the school entrance, the sound of sirens shattered the morning calm. A convoy of FBI vehicles sped into the parking lot, their lights flashing and their sirens blaring. Within seconds, the entire school was in lockdown. The students on the campus, now confused and panicked, were ushered into classrooms, some of them whispering nervously to one another, trying to make sense of what was happening. Teachers scrambled to keep order, but no one had any answers. Emma had already disappeared inside the building, her part in this unfolding mystery, now a quiet enigma. As the lockdown continued, no one could understand why the FBI had shown up. What connection did Emma have to this sudden, overwhelming presence of law enforcement? And why had she whispered those 3 words to the bus driver? The tension was palpable, the air thick with uncertainty. The whole school was on edge, every student and teacher wondering if they were safe. What had triggered this response, and what role Emma had played in all of it? But as the minutes turned into hours, the questions only grew louder, with no answers in sight. What had Emma known? What had she seen? What had she been trying to warn them about? The clock was ticking, and the silence in the halls was deafening. Everyone was waiting for the truth. But it seemed like that truth would only come in time. And in the meantime, the story of Emma's whisper and the FBI's lockdown was only just beginning to unfold. But little did anyone know, the story was far from over. The consequences of those 3 whispered words would ripple through their lives and the lives of many others in ways they could never have imagined. And as the lockdown continued, the question on everyone's mind remained: what was really going on, and how had one quiet girl managed to set it all in motion? The school's loudspeakers crackled, and a voice came through, trying to remain calm, but betraying the edge of panic. Attention all students and staff, please remain in your classrooms. A lockdown is in effect. Do not leave the building until further notice. Authorities are on site and will provide instructions soon. For most students, this was just another drill, a routine that had been practiced countless times. But for Emma, this wasn't a drill. The words she had whispered to Mr. Thompson, words she hadn't fully understood herself when she spoke them, had ignited a series of events she could never have anticipated. Inside the building, the sense of unease spread quickly. The teachers did their best to keep students calm, but their own anxiety was palpable. As the minutes stretched into hours, the uncertainty only grew. What was happening? Why was the FBI involved? Was this some sort of threat, or had something terrible already occurred? The questions spiraled, each one feeding the others, creating a web of fear that no one could untangle. Emma sat quietly in her classroom, her mind racing. Her friends looked at her, concerned. But she couldn't bring herself to explain what had happened on the bus. She knew they wouldn't understand. No one would. How could they? It wasn't like she had any answers. It had all started so suddenly, so unexpectedly, and now she felt trapped in her own uncertainty. A few weeks earlier, Emma had been an average student with an average life. There was nothing unusual about her at all, but lately, everything felt off. There were moments when she could sense something was wrong, something lurking just beyond her reach. It started with a strange feeling in her gut, the kind that made her uneasy for no clear reason. She didn't know how to explain it, but she could sense danger, distant but approaching. It was just a few days ago when she saw him, a man. He was standing on the corner near her house, watching her with an unsettling intensity. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but she had seen him every day since. She didn't know why, but the man gave her the same chill every time she passed him. His eyes seemed to follow her, never blinking, never looking away. Emma tried to shake the feeling off, but it clung to her like a shadow, growing heavier with each passing day. The strange feeling intensified, culminating in that quiet moment on the bus when the words, "Call the police," slipped from her mouth. But why had she said it? Was it because of the man? Was it something else entirely? She had no answers. In the classroom, Emma was hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. The air was thick with tension. The students around her whispered nervously, speculating on what was happening. Was it a bomb threat? A shooting? No one knew, but everyone feared the worst. The teachers remained in the front, doing their best to keep a sense of order, but their eyes darted toward the windows, their minds obviously preoccupied with something they weren't saying. Outside, the FBI had cordoned off the school grounds, setting up barricades and blocking all exits. The officers moved with precision, their faces grim, their eyes sharp and focused. Something serious was going on, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with her. She had no concrete proof, no real evidence, but she couldn't escape the nagging suspicion that she had somehow set this all in motion. Across the school, in the principal's office, an urgent meeting was taking place. The FBI agents, clad in dark suits, were speaking with Mr. Hayes, the principal, and a few of the senior staff members. The agents were discussing the situation in hushed tones, but the tension in the room was obvious. One of the agents, a tall woman with short black hair, was the one who seemed to be running the show. She kept glancing at her phone, checking the updates, her brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. "We need to find out who she is," the agent said sharply. "Emma Lawson. She's the one who reported the potential threat." Mr. Hayes looked at her in confusion. "Emma Lawson? She's a student, a quiet one. She's never been in any trouble." The agent's gaze remained cold. "It doesn't matter. We've got information that suggests she might know something about the situation, something big." The tension in the room deepened. Outside, the sirens continued to wail in the distance, and the muffled sounds of law enforcement moving in and out of the building only added to the sense of impending danger. The FBI was clearly preparing for something huge. But what was it? Back in Emma's classroom, she could hear muffled voices from the hallway, the footsteps of officers moving past her door. She couldn't stop thinking about the man she had seen, the strange feeling that had followed her for weeks. She had never been a paranoid person, but now, with everything happening around her, the pieces seemed to be falling into place. The man, the whispers, the warnings. It all felt connected. But how? As the lockdown continued, more and more questions piled up, but the answers remained elusive. Was Emma simply caught in a dangerous game? Or had she unknowingly become the key to stopping something catastrophic? Outside the classroom, Emma heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Someone was coming. Her heart raced, her palms sweating. She didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. Would they come for her next? Would they demand answers she didn't have? The door creaked open, and Emma's gaze met the agent's eyes. The tall woman from the FBI. "Emma," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "We need to talk." In that moment, Emma knew she was no longer just a bystander. She was in the thick of it, and the choices she made next would determine how it all played out. Emma felt her heart pound in her chest as the agent stepped into the classroom, her presence sending a wave of tension through the air. The door clicked shut behind her, and for a moment, the room was silent, save for the muffled sounds of sirens and distant voices. Emma's mind raced. Why was she being singled out? What did they want from her? The agent's eyes were intense, but there was something in her expression that hinted at a deeper concern, a sense of urgency. "Emma," she said again, her voice steady but urgent. "I need you to listen carefully. We have a situation, and we believe you might know something that could help us stop it." Emma swallowed hard. "I don't understand. What's going on? Why am I involved?" The agent's gaze softened for a moment. "I know this is hard to believe, but there's a threat targeting your school, and it's bigger than we thought. We've been tracking it for days, and we think it's connected to you. That's why we're here." Emma's stomach twisted. She had known something was off, but the weight of the situation hit her all at once. "What do you mean connected to me?" The agent hesitated, glancing over her shoulder toward the door. "There's a man we've been watching. We believe he's involved with a group planning something catastrophic, and we think you've seen him. The man who's been following you." Emma's blood ran cold. The man, the one who had been standing near her house, watching her with those cold, unsettling eyes. I saw him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been there for weeks. I thought I was just being paranoid." The agent nodded grimly. "You weren't imagining things. We've been trying to track his movements, but he's been very careful. That's why we need your help. We believe you're the key to finding out where he is and what he's planning." Emma's mind spun. This was real. It wasn't just a strange feeling or a coincidence. She had been a part of something much larger than she had ever imagined. The whispers, the warnings. It had all led to this moment. The agent's voice dropped to a low whisper. "Emma, there's no time. We need to know everything you've seen. Where did you last see him? What did he do? Anything you remember could be the missing piece." Emma's hands trembled as she thought back to the days leading up to this moment. The unsettling feeling that had gnawed at her for so long suddenly made sense. The man wasn't just watching her. He was watching for a reason. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and now, it seemed, that moment had arrived. "I saw him near the back gate," Emma said, her voice barely a breath. "He was standing there, just staring at the school. And the night before, I saw him in the parking lot. He was talking to someone, but I couldn't hear what they were saying." The agent's eyes narrowed. "Do you remember what the man looked like? Anything specific?" Emma closed her eyes, trying to focus on the details. "He's tall, dark hair, wears a jacket. I think he's always looking for someone, waiting for them, maybe." The agent's expression hardened. "I think I know who he is." She turned sharply and left the room without another word, leaving Emma to process everything she had just learned. Minutes later, the door opened again, but this time, the agent was not alone. Another officer entered, his face pale, his jaw clenched in frustration. He held up a photo, and Emma's blood ran cold when she saw the man in the picture, the same man who had been watching her for weeks. "This is James Foster," the officer said. "He's been on our radar for a while now, part of a much larger network. We believe he's orchestrating an attack on the school, but we didn't know he was this close to you." Emma felt her breath catch. James Foster. The name didn't mean anything to her, but the way the officers were looking at the photo told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just a random threat. It was something far more calculated, far more dangerous, and she had somehow found herself at the center of it all. The officer continued, "We've been trying to track him, but we didn't know how deep he had infiltrated the school system. We believe he's using you as a pawn, Emma. He's been monitoring your movements, trying to get close without you noticing." The realization hit Emma like a punch to the gut. She had been part of the plan all along, whether she had known it or not. James Foster had been watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike, and it seemed like that moment was now. But just as the officers were about to say more, the building suddenly shook. A loud explosion echoed through the walls, sending everyone in the room into a panic. The FBI agents sprang into action, and Emma's heart leapt into her throat. The attack had already begun. Without thinking, Emma darted toward the door, her legs moving on instinct. She had to warn everyone, had to do something before it was too late. She burst into the hallway, only to find chaos unfolding around her. The building was filling with smoke, alarms blaring, and the sounds of footsteps echoing as people scrambled for safety. But in the midst of it all, Emma spotted something that made her blood freeze. There in the chaos was James Foster. He was standing at the far end of the hall, a smug smile on his face, as he watched the destruction unfold. Before Emma could react, a hand grabbed her arm. It was the agent again. "You need to get out of here now," she shouted. Emma hesitated for a moment, but then, as the realization hit her, this was the moment she had been waiting for. The man she had seen, the one who had been manipulating everything, was here, and he was finally making his move. With the FBI closing in and the building in lockdown, the final confrontation began. Emma had helped them uncover the threat, but Now, it was up to the agents to take down James Foster and stop the attack. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and Emma, once an ordinary student, had become a key figure in preventing a disaster. In the end, the FBI successfully apprehended Foster and dismantled the network he had been running. Emma was safe, the school was secure, and the mystery of the whispers and the strange man was finally resolved. But as she walked out of the school that day, one question lingered in her mind. How had she known? How had she, of all people, been the one to stop it all? It was a question she would never fully answer. But she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again, and neither would the lives of the people around her. She had become a hero, in her own quiet, unassuming way, saving everyone, without even realizing it. The events of that day would echo in her memory forever, a reminder that sometimes, even the smallest whisper can change everything. So, Minnie,